Okay, Chair, over to
There we
yourself.
go. Okay, thank you, Amy. Right. Normal housekeeping prior to the commencement of business. May I remind everyone present this meeting will be live streamed and recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a committee member wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up if they can be seen, or to use the hand up option on the application. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard, then they should let the chair, myself, or Democratic Services Officer know as soon as possible. If you have a webcam, then you should try turning that off in order to help broadband or Wi-Fi bandwidth, so at least you can hear and be heard. If required, participants can dial into the meeting using a telephone. That's the telephone number provided on the invite. If for any technical reason any person party to the proceedings is unable to hear, then the hearing will be adjourned for a short time to allow contact to be made. It's important to remember that all parties must hear all the proceedings unless they themselves decide to leave, otherwise they shouldn't vote. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat. For the sake of the recording, the chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and/or grab my attention or Democratic Services only. And when it comes to the public speakers, the allocated public speaking minutes will be strictly adhered to. I'll cue you in and you'll get a 1 minute warning prior to the 3 minutes. Right, moving strictly into the, or swiftly rather, into the agenda. Part 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. Only apologies received by myself is from Councillor Pamela Drake.
Thank you. Anyone else aware of any apologies for absence for this afternoon? I see no hands. Okay. Agenda item 2, minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of November. Can I take it that these are accepted? Charles, yeah, thank you. Moved by Charles Champion, Councillor Champion, and seconded by Councillor Ernest. Well, there's a couple of seconders. Thank you. Right, item 3, received declarations of interest in the Council's Code of Conduct. Anthony.
Yes, Chairman, I'd like to declare in respect of agenda item number 9, the last application in there, 2022-000918 full, 96 Lavenock Road. I'd like to declare that I have predetermined my decision on this, even in the light of the observations received and changes, and therefore I will withdraw from the meeting when this item is discussed and take no part in the debate.
Thank you, Councillor Ernest. Councillor Perry, I see your hand up.
Hi, yeah, in a previous role, I've previously commented on behalf of residents on behalf of the former police station in St Nicholas, but I will be looking at this with fresh, open eyes this evening.
Okay. Right, moving on then. Report of the Chief Executive's site inspections. This is from the last meeting. Can I just take that as read? That's just a report on who was at those site visits last time and the apologies received. I see no comments, so I'll take that as agreed. Item 5, building regs, applications and other building control matters determined by the head of regeneration. Councillor Wilson, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, my hand's up because I want to say I apologise for being late. I just joined the meeting.
Thank you, Mark. Moving on. So item 5 then, I don't see any comments or anything like that. I take that as accepted by the committee. Charles, you've got your hand up.
With regarding to building regs approval with conditions on page 8, 2022-0814 BR, could I have information on the conditions? Otherwise, I'm happy.
Which Councillor Champion, which number was that?
Page 8.
Page 8, 20220814, the former Cowbridge Comprehensive School at Burton Road, Cowbridge.
Okay. Are you happy for me to provide them to you separately after the meeting?
Yes, I am.
Lovely. I'll do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Charles. Any other comments? No. In that case, I take those as accepted. Item 6, planning applications determined by the head of regen and planning under delegated powers. Again, any comment, questions? No. I take that as accepted. Appeals. I think, Ian, you're going to take us through this. Ian Robinson.
Yes, Chair, thanks. There's members will note there's two appeal decisions on the report. The first one relates to, bear with me, just getting down to the page. The first one relates to the refusal of planning permission for 2 new houses on a small parcel of land that's kind of landlocked with dwellings all around it near Fairford Street in Barry. We refused this application a little while ago, principally for reasons relating to impact on neighbours, so in terms of the physical impact of the building being in close proximity to neighbouring gardens, and also overlooking from first floor windows towards neighbouring gardens at close proximity. The inspector agreed essentially with both those points, felt there would be an overbearing impact from the dwelling on one garden in particular, and also an unacceptable level of overlooking. We haven't raised an issue with the principle of the development of this site. It's for most reasons a reasonable site in within a settlement, and would represent potentially efficient use of land. But it's probably going to be difficult for them to get 2-storey dwellings on the site, given the proximity to neighbours. So that was good that the inspector supported this on both of those reasons. And the second appeal relates to 97 Tynewith Road in Bury, and this was an application to put a new kind of crossover and vehicle parking area at the front of the property. Such are the constraints of the site that it's not possible to sort of park a car in a way which would enable turning and kind of leaving the site in a forward gear, kind of perpendicular to the road, so that would result in vehicles kind of pulling out at an angle with reduced visibility, also coming out between parked cars. And the inspector noted that even though this was to allow sort of parking close to the dwelling for the purposes of electric charging, even though there's obviously a clear benefit to use of an electric vehicle, he didn't feel that outweighed the highway safety issues. Also raised concerns about the loss of the front wall, which we also raised issues with. So that appeal was dismissed as well. So both were dismissed, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments? I see none. I take it that's accepted. Item 8, trees, delegated list. Again, I ask for comments, questions, whatever, and see none. So moving on now to planning applications. First one on the list is Albert Road Methodist Church, 2022 00077 FUL. And I think Steve Baker, you're going to introduce this, please.
Thanks, Chairman. Sorry, Steve Butler.
Butler. I'm sorry. Yeah,
it's not a problem.
It's my writing. My
Okay.
appalling handwriting.
Just firstly on this application, we've had a number of matters arising notes. We've had 3 matters arising notes in respect of additional comments from neighbouring occupiers. There's a 4th matter that's been circulated. That's in respect of condition 3. Condition 3 relates to the hours of opening. There was a slight complicated wording that we had, which didn't quite read correctly. So we have suggested amended wording for condition 3, if members could please note that. So the application itself, it was subject to a site visit this morning. So a number of members of the committee would have had the opportunity to view this morning. It relates to Albert Road Methodist Church, which is in Albert Road within the settlement of Penarth. So the church building itself is recognised as a county treasure and also a positive building within the conservation area. as you saw this morning, the site is in quite a prominent corner location on the corner of Albert Road, Albert Crescent. It also backs onto Jubilee Lane, and also directly abuts two residential properties at numbers 3 and 4 Albert Crescent. So the application as submitted is for the change of use of the remaining part of the building. So part of the building has already been converted to flats, and this is the conversion of the remaining part. It's the change of use to a mix of office space, community space, and lifestyle uses. So that comprises of 2 uses, which is a B1A use and a D1 use. As part of the change of use, external alterations, including window refurbishment and replacement, have also been undertaken. So, as many people know, the development has commenced. So the application is in the main retrospective. So we're dealing with the development as built, although the plans do show some changes from what is currently viewed on site. So I'll just very briefly run through how the building is going to be set up. So the proposed basement, the lower basement level, that would be an open plan multi-purpose space. So the agent has said this would be a community space, and this would be a D1 use. The basement windows, which are here, will remain infilled. They have been infilled, concrete infilled, I think, for about 50 years. And there are also a number of existing vents that serve that internal space. And also there's an additional vent has been inserted into this window, which we believe serves one of the WCs. So coming on to the ground floor, as you can see, effectively the open plan church has been sort of subdivided and sort of sectioned out internally. So you've got the lifestyle rooms centrally and to the back edge of the site. Those are the D1 uses. More around the perimeter, you've got the office space, and to the side and near the front of the building. And then just leading up to the top floor, this is exclusively offices. So again, you've got a number of offices, and you've also got the little terrace area, which I'll explain a little bit about later. So just in terms of the sort of intensity of the use, the ground floor would be petitioned to provide mixed offices for 18 people and lifestyle rooms for 52 people. This envisages that the lifestyle could be occupied, for example, by a physiotherapist. There's also a kitchen, as we saw this morning, and a tea point and toilets, kind of welfare facilities for anyone using the building. Obscure glazing to internal height of 2.1 metres from ground floor level is proposed on the windows facing Jubilee Lane, which would be these windows. And further obscure glazing is proposed for the east elevation offices and the lifestyle rooms. Again, the first floor would be divided for offices up to 58 people. Again, this is served by a small kitchenette and toilet. So as we saw this morning, the premises will be run through a management company. They'll be responsible for the day-to-day operation of the building in respect of tenants, cleaning and contact points, etc. So space within the building will then be let to individuals or companies. That's the use. In terms of the external changes, it's quite a detailed schedule that have been circulated on the plans in front of you. So the principal elevation of change really is probably Jubilee Lane. So as we saw this morning, the lower windows which serve the basement remain to be infilled, which is basically these are concrete infilled panels. The upper windows which were filled in, which is shown black here, they have been opened up and new glazing has been installed in those windows. And at the moment, those windows are fitted with an obscure glazed film. In respect of the upper part, as we saw this morning, what we call the terrace area, this was originally a flat roof serving what is a 1950s extension. Let me just run to the photos, which probably show a bit better. No, they don't. So if you zoom in on here, so this is the flat roof area. There was historically access onto flat roof. Obviously, members will be aware that work has started on site, and that a proper door had been put in with a view of using this terrace for kind of recreational breakout space for the occupiers, and even for rest areas, and also potentially operating classes. So we weren't happy with that. We certainly weren't happy with the views that would result from the occupiers in Clive Place. This photo being an example of one of them, where people could stand on the elevated terrace and look directly into the back gardens and the rear windows of these properties. So to combat that, potentially you could have obscure glazing or a solid screen. That in itself is considered to cause harm. So we have conditioned that there should be no use of that terrace at all, and that's set up by condition. In addition to that, the what was a white rendered, rather untidy elevation has been timber clad. Again, we felt that timber cladding was not particularly in keeping with the character of the building. Again, it is a county treasure. It's in the conservation area. So in this instance, we've asked for that cladding to be painted anthracite grey, which is actually the same colour as the windows. Just more generally, from sort of the discussions this morning, and obviously from the representations that we have received significant representations on this application. I know all officers, certainly the case officer, and myself, Ian Robinson, we've all been involved in kind of managing these representations, and certainly the local members have also spent significant amount of time dealing with representations from neighbours, and there have been a number of site visits on this site, and our enforcement team as well have been significantly involved. But we think we've got to a point now where this application is complete enough for us to be able to progress to a point of determination. This is just an example of the window prior to it being obscurely glazed by a film. This is the sort of level of overlooking that would have taken place on Clive Place. Obviously, the first floor windows have been reopened, so this would be introducing a new view. I mean, normally from a planning point of view, you only look at additional impacts, and you also from a planning point of view, we look at fallback positions quite significantly as well. But these upper windows have been reintroduced. Something just worth mentioning on the windows, sorry if I'm going on a bit. We saw this morning that film has been applied to these windows. Whilst film itself would prevent overlooking, we have historically had concerns with film and the fact that there's not a degree of permanence, and they can be peeled off, or they tend to fall off themselves. So the condition does ask for the glazing to be fully glazed Pilkington, as specified in the condition. Those are fixed glaze units, and they'd be very difficult to actually take out and remove, rather than just peeling a bit of film off. I think I've said enough on that, Chairman, so I'm back to you. Thank you.
You're on mute, Chair.
Sorry, you're on mute, Chairman.
I was sorry about that. I was apologising, Stephen, for miscalling you earlier, because I couldn't read my own writing, and it's up there on the screen, but it's me. Mark, I'm proposing to bring in the speakers first before we start before we get into the debate or discussion. Thank you. So we come on now on to in order of procedure. We come to our public speakers. We have two speakers against and one for on this issue, and the first speaker I have is Mr. Roberts, Graham Roberts. Are you with us, Graham, please?
I am indeed. Can you hear me okay?
I can both hear and now see you. You've got 3 minutes from when you start speaking, and our democratic officer will give you a 1 minute warning when we're 2 minutes in. We do stick to it fairly strictly. When you finish speaking, I give the opportunity for members to ask any follow-up questions from what you said. So if you just stay on the screen until we've decided whether they want to ask any questions, that will be helpful. So when you're ready, then.
Thank you. Yeah, my name's Graham. My family live directly underneath the terrace roof area on the south side of Jubilee Lane. Just firstly, like to thank Mr. Butler for, saying some things that, helped us a bit. Things that could have been said a long time ago, actually. But yeah, there's a duty of care to protect young children from harm, and we've been let down on this front over the last 12 to 18 months. And my wife and I are naturally concerned for the welfare of our children, first and foremost. And over the course of the last year, son and daughter have stopped playing in our garden because of all the work going on, and the noise pollution within the roof terrace area in particular has been quite extensive due to the shape and the sound rebounding off it. So we're keen to see a perpetuity agreement in place there to ensure the roof terrace can never be used as an outdoor space. And as you've all witnessed today, it's too close to gardens. It's massively overbearing, with the noise pollution being a particularly large issue along with privacy. And I think you will agree that it's very convenient and telling how you weren't able to go onto the roof terrace area today in order to see for yourselves. We're also very concerned about the privacy of all new windows fitted. The film on the windows can't be managed long term. The south facing, the privacy layer is already peeling with the heat of the sun. So for privacy concerns for our family, we ask that a permanent obscure glass is fitted to all new windows on the south and east sides. For noise pollution concerns and for privacy concerns for our children, we also ask for non-opening windows fitted on all windows on the south and east side. We've already been subjected to Simon speaking from an open window on multiple occasions already, and if you multiply this up by the number of inhabitants, it'll be significantly worse by an order of some magnitude. We also ask for a proper noise pollution report due to the proximity of the building to nearby houses and due to the sheer amount of windows and new vents added. Some vents have yet to be determined on the levels of pollution and noise at this stage. Not forgetting this is still meant to be a residential area, and as a result of the privacy and noise pollution concerns from above, we also request that the office hours are reduced to 6 p.m. and the ground floor usage reduced to 9 p.m, thus allowing our children to be able to go to bed at a normal time without being kept awake by the many individuals who could be leaving the building with the light pollution concerns from all the open windows. Also, trying to park in our streets is already quite impossible, and there's not an area set aside for a bike store for this many individuals. There's only 3 racks currently outside the front door. So due to the lack of parking, lack of space for a bike storage area, lack of bin storage amenities, the building simply isn't designed for this many people at a time. The only option is to reduce the number of individuals for office space down by a third or more. Thank you.
Thanks for your time. As I say, if you stay on for a moment while I ask if there are any people, any members of the committee who might have any matters arising from what Mr. Roberts has had to say. I see no hands. In that case, thank you, Graham. We will leave you. You may leave us and turn off your camera. That would be helpful. Next speaker then is Rebecca Wheeler. Again, are you there, Rebecca?
I'm here, yes.
Hello, yeah, we met this morning. Hi. Same rules, 3 minutes from the moment from the time you start speaking, and if there are any follow-ups from the members of the committee, and Amy will give you a warning of 1 minute before the end. Whenever you start when you want.
I'll be reading from a document today in order to meet the time constraints set by the committee. I represent not just my household, but other residents of Clive Place who've raised concerns based on first-hand experiences over the past 12 months since building began without planning permission. Firstly, we welcome the recent amendments to plans. However, we consider a facility that proposes to cater for in excess of 130 people on a daily basis is unacceptable. We consider that this is a case of overdevelopment within a residential area. However, we've never been opposed to a balanced proposal with sympathetic planning. If the committee are of a mind to approve these plans, we request the following in order to minimise the impact of overlooking light, noise and smell pollution and parking. B1A office hours to be reduced from 7:30 to 6 p.m. at night. D1 usage hours to be reduced to 9 at night or 9:30 at night. And D1/B1A proposed occupancy to be halved. Time restricted or resident parking to be implemented. All south and east facing windows to be non-opening and fitted with permanent obscured glass. Assurances that the proposed balcony area will not be used in perpetuity, that the new door is returned to an obscure window, and all external light trunking, tables, cameras and sensors are removed. Confirmation that cafe or bar type services are not to be permitted, and clarification is sought that the vents at basement level do not contravene any environmental legislation. The demolished wall will be reinstated to its original height and capped with appropriate stone up to the red brick pillar as a minimum. The wooden cladding is replaced by suitable durable material in keeping with the appearance of the original church and in line with the conservation plan for the area. Our reasoning based on our experiences is as follows. The site and location of the site are unsuitable for the proposed purpose. The previously proposed balcony was an overbearing intrusion on residents' privacy, resulting in children changing bedrooms and residents feeling unable to freely use their gardens. Non-opening windows will also minimise any opportunity for overlooking. Residents working from home can clearly hear all conversations taking place from within the former church when windows are open, and young children have been exposed to inappropriate language and been unable to get to sleep in the evening due to light pollution. Evidence has been provided to the planning department of the impact of light pollution into our homes. It was deemed a necessary condition when 10A was built that permanent off-road parking for one family was required. Simple research has shown that an organisation linked to the Albert Road development has over 400 employees over 5 offices in South Wales. Extrapolate this across the proposed B1A use for one office and you have a true local impact figure rather than speculation. The request for restricted hours for B1A and D1 will help to alleviate the crossover between office workers leaving and residents returning home. Our understanding is the removal of the original wall on Jubilee Lane was a criminal offence and should be fully repaired, and the building has never been used as offices in the past. The planning department have been provided with details of witnesses to this effect. Thank you for your time, and you're welcome to a copy of these notes if they're at all helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Are there any points of clarification any members of the committee would like to ask of the speaker? I see no hands in that case. Thank you very much for your time and contribution, Rebecca and Mrs. Wheeler. And if you'd like to go off mic and go off camera, then we'll continue with our discussion. Next speaker is John Hurley, who is speaking for the applicant, and I believe because we've had 6 minutes against, you get 6 minutes for, if you need that much, and the same rules apply when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair, members. Before turning to address the issues that have been raised, in order to demonstrate that they have been more than adequately considered, there are a number of significant benefits that will be brought about to the proposals which need to be highlighted. As you are aware, we've heard this application has been recommended for approval by officers. It will deliver a mixed-use development of employment and community space, and is an opportunity to bring back into use this prominent site and go some way towards meeting the council's aspirations to support Penarth as a key town within the Vale. The scheme proposes the beneficial use of a former church building in a highly sustainable location. The application has the full support and backing of council's officers, such as those in the planning and highway sections. The proposal is supported by a raft of planning policies at both the national and local level, and as a result has been recommended for approval. The committee report begins by noting that the proposal will result in the long-term retention of the building and also preserve its character to the benefit of the conservation area. In terms of the proposed uses and the principle of development, it's important to note that the report confirms that the previous use of the building as a church would have been within a D1 use class. It goes on to confirm that the D1 community uses that are proposed, therefore, in essence, do not need planning permission and could actually be intensified without any restriction. It is also important to note that when the building was used as a church, the upper floors, which are now proposed as offices, were offices to the church, and the windows, as we heard this morning, were clearly glazed. They weren't obscurely glazed as is now proposed. As the report notes, this fallback position is a key material consideration, and as I've just mentioned, there were no restrictions. So there weren't any restrictions on the use of the building, for example, in terms of opening hours. But in terms of the matters raised that we've heard, the report confirms that no issues have been raised by environmental health officers, for instance, in terms of noise, air issues, or even light pollution. We've heard that there will be no overlooking of neighbouring properties now due to the obscure glazing and a condition not allowing the roof terrace to be used. The conservation officer supports, for example, the reopening of the windows, which were previously bricked up, and they support the overall approach to the scheme. And importantly, they confirm that the proposal preserves this county treasure. Highways have also raised no objection in terms of car parking due to the fallback and historic use of the building, generating more trips than the current uses that are proposed. As we saw on the site visit this morning, the proposal will deliver a sympathetic conversion of this important building. It will provide flexible employment opportunities and space for local community groups to flourish. For example, with people working and using the building, they will be easily able to walk into the town centre and take advantage of the shops and services, which will have a knock-on positive benefit for the existing local businesses in the town centre. In summary, the proposed beneficial reuse of this important local building represents a distinct regeneration opportunity, which is supported by a large number of planning policies at both the national and local level, and will secure the future of this key town centre site. Thank you for your time, and we would respectfully request that the application is approved in line with the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hurley. I see, Charles, you have your hand up. You have a point of clarification.
Yes. Mr. Hurley, you say that the bar use would be less than it was when it was a church. Do you have documentary evidence of that?
As part of the planning application, we submitted a transport note, and the transport note assessed the previous use of the building in terms of its D1 use. That note demonstrated that the trips associated with the previous use would be more than those associated with the proposed uses. That was then considered as part of the planning, as part of the consideration and determination of the application. It's referenced within the report, and Highways are in agreement with that as well, highway officers.
So no, you don't?
Yeah, I think I have evidence that in terms of referring to the transport note that we submitted.
Yeah, Councillor Wilson, you have your hand up.
Yes, I just want to ask a question of Mr. Hurley. Thank you very much for your comments there. Just a question mark about the office use. What sort of market research did you undertake within the Penarth area to indicate there's a need for additional office use within the town centre?
I haven't myself undertaken any market research. So I think the developer who has got a track record in delivering these schemes across South Wales, whether that's Cardiff or Swansea, will have undertaken that market research themselves. But I don't think it necessarily formed part of the consideration of the application. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I see no more hands in that case. Thank you, Mr. Hurley. Oh, hang on, there's another hand. Don't go. Councillor Payne.
Speak too soon. Can I just check, in terms of the roof terrace, was it previously used by the church?
Sorry, Chair, can I just check, are we going to go into debate, or are we still on points of clarification?
This I think is still a point of clarification. For Mr. Hurley.
Okay, thank you.
Well, in terms of the roof terrace, you know, I couldn't comment on that. I don't have any historic knowledge associated with it, I'm afraid.
Okay.
We can discuss it. We can discuss it later, but I'd note in the report that the roof terrace is now ruled as being not used at all under any circumstances. I think Stephen will clear this up when he comes back on all this. In fact, I'll move to him now. Stephen.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, just to pick up on Mr. Hurley's point, and from the site visit this morning, I mean, I guess historically that was just a section of flat roof over the 1950s extension that had a kind of slightly awkward side door onto it. Obviously, as the scheme was built out, they tried to formalise the access onto that space by putting a new door in, and obviously to make the safe use of that space, then proposing a balustrade around it, which is obviously a requirement from building regulation point of view. But as we clearly indicated, and from the site visit this morning, we're saying that the use of that flat roof is not acceptable. So we have conditioned it, and you know, obviously agreeing with many of the points made by the representations this evening. So it's not being used. So yeah, there's a condition on it. The condition is quite clear. I'm not saying in an absolute case of emergency that something might not happen, or for example, when they need to replace the glazing in the windows that are there, they'll probably have to get access onto the roof because those windows on the other side are in a vaulted area, so very, very difficult to access to it. But in terms of day-to-day use, it is restricted.
Steve, while we're at it, can you just address some of the issues raised by the first two speakers as well? Because I believe that a lot of those have been addressed
Yeah, I was
within the conditioning.
that's fine. I'm happy to do it. I was going to come back perhaps in part of the larger debate with the members, but obviously, you know, certainly some of the points that were raised, you know, we're not in disagreement with. You absolutely agree with. So, officers been working significant time with this application, resolving it, trying to find out exactly what the proposals were, and to some degree, kind of catching up with as the build was progressing on additional elements that we're being made aware of. So again, we certainly understand the concerns raised by the nearby residents of back onto Jubilee Lane. I'll just share my photos again. Because the church is very, very, you know, it's a big church. It's right on the lane, and within within 3 meters, you're on the back of the properties. So again, just talking about the windows, what we've confirmed is the windows need to be obscure glazed and non-opening to a height of 1.7 meters. I believe that because of the significant heights of the rooms from floor to ceiling, that the actual level of obscure glazing will probably be likely much above that, but the minimum is 1.7. I know in some of the representations received, there's a request for these windows to be non-opening. Obviously, we have to look at the reason for that and whether it's justified to condition that. In terms of the uses, particularly the B1 uses, you know, these are uses that are considered to be able to take place in a residential area without any detriment to amenity of the area by reason of noise, vibration, or smells. So by implication, we could not justify requiring those windows to be fixed on the basis they are serving a use where that use is considered to be acceptable in a residential area. I mean, there are many kind of mid-terrace properties where there are offices physically adjoining properties. Here, there is a degree of separation. I know it's an imposing building and new windows have been introduced at the higher level, but there's no justification from our point of view to restrict those windows from being opening at the high level, of course, to make sure the obscure glazing is provided at the ground floor. In terms of the hours of operation that have been suggested, which are sort of much more restricted to those which officers are recommending, again, it's the same issue. It's a mix of B1 use as offices. Again, that use is considered acceptable in a residential area. And obviously the D1 element to some degree doesn't actually require planning permission, but is being shown for completeness in respect of how the whole site is being laid out. So what we're actually doing, and as John Hurley has alluded, is we are conditioning the whole use of the building. So actually providing much more, we're actually now providing control over the D1 uses where there is currently no control over the D1 uses in terms of the hours of, you know, the number of days that it could be used, and, you know, it could be used, you know, throughout the night as long as it's a D1 use. So obviously that includes turning lights off as well within the specified hours. So officers feel that we really are controlling this development, you know, quite significantly. Again, we talk about the fallback position, but it is absolutely relevant because we have to test our conditions and test our assessment of the application and how that church could operate going forward without any consents. I'm happy to leave it there, so I can pick up on any more issues if they're raised.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Sivanyanam, you have your hand up as local member. You too have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair.
As per the rules.
it won't take 3 minutes. As you know, I am a local ward member, and along with you, Chair, we've spent a significant amount of time speaking to residents and to officers and attending the Methodist Church. It's, you know, I think one of the main issues about this development was, I think, the appearance of the developer doing work which wasn't in keeping with the conservation area and prior to submitting any planning application. And I think that was a difficulty. Officers jumped on this fairly quickly and have spent a significant amount of time talking to residents and trying to find solutions. So I hope we have come a significant way with that. And from what we've heard from residents this evening, I think, we have come a significant way. For example, the stone wall will be rebuilt. The terrace, won't be in use. And I think the officers have been very responsive to the concerns, the genuine concerns of residents, and also to our representations as ward members for that area. I think the final thing I would say is that at the end of the day, this is a balance of what is permitted development and the use of that building, and it will be really good to see that building come back into use. My children use that building for that, for guides and karate and so on, and that was a long time ago now, and the building has remained empty for a while. So it's really good for the community for that building to be used. We will continue to listen to residents. So the building, on the one hand, we do need the building used, but on the other hand, we do still, know that we are in a conservation area, and we want to make sure that people's quality of life is also remains at at a good level. So we will as we have started in this project, we will continue to listen to residents and move forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ruba. Right, moving on then to the general debate. Mark, you have your hand up first.
Thank you very much, Chair. I mean, I've listened to the debate and I've read the report quite extensively, and I know that officers have tried, and I think tried really hard to try and look at the concerns of residents and take them in. Largely honest. There are a few issues though that I would like to address. Obviously, the office use. To me, I haven't really seen any demonstration that there's a need for additional office use within this area. As we know, we've got many empty buildings now in Penarth, and I really feel that this could make a better use of this area. I mean, this particular place, it's without question. I think Councillor Ruba has rightly said it's community use, and I think we all accept that it always has been an area of community use. It's been extensively used over a number of years, and it's always been a fantastic building in terms of what it offers. But I do have concerns over the office use of it, because notably, we've got issues of parking within the town. No one can deny that, and there are big issues over this. And although I know that the officers have addressed it in the condition of a travel plan, I would like to see some more detail over that travel plan from officers, if possible, to look into the feasibility of that, to see how realistic that will be in place. Given the fact that in this location, there is very difficult off-street parking available, in fact, almost non-existent in certain areas. And the other thing is the stained glass window aspect as well. I just wonder perhaps any chance of any sort of degree of restoration of that. But I agree, it's a finely balanced application. I'm not really very much in favour. I'm not really against it very much either. But I do think if we had a few more conditions in relation to office use, perhaps, and restriction of it, and also perhaps maybe look at the stained glass windows, then I'd be willing to accept it. But at the moment, I'm fairly neutral about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Before I bring you in, Steve, Councillor Ernest and Councillor Cave both have their hands up. I'd like to bring them in, and you can address any issues raised together, please. Councillor Ernest.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I know this building from many, many years ago. I was interested to hear Councillor Ruba referring to the fact that her children have been there. Well, my children are in their late 40s and 50s now and use the building for scouts. It was used for youth centre for a while. And in fact, the Penarth Citizens Advice Bureau was at first floor level when it was first set up. So there's been a huge community use of the building over the years. What concerns me, though, is that I think office use is rather different. Office use suggests that there would be occupation of the building from morning until late afternoon. There would be movement, people coming and going. And whilst you may say, well, that's the same with community use, it's not the same because there was a different element to it, I suppose. People came for a particular session of Scouts or Brownies or whoever it happened to be, and they went away and they were there a short time. With office use, could be 8 hours, 9 hours a day or whatever. I have a degree of sympathy with the people living in Clive Place because clearly the church overlooks their gardens, and I'm a great respecter of privacy, one's own privacy. So those are the aspects that concern me. I'm happy to listen, of course, to the rest of the debate, but at the moment I'm veering towards the fact I think that the proposed office use, despite the fact that it already has D2 usage, I'm inclined to the fact that this would cause unacceptable concerns to the neighbourhood. I'll say no more for the moment. Thank you, Chairman.
Apologies. Thank you, Councillor Ernest. Councillor Cave.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I too have concerns for the neighbours. I do think probably there are some more conditions that we might need to have to make here, particularly in respect of, I think it was the applicant's representative that said that the applicant is well used to building in Cardiff and other places, and that rather surprises me, because why would the applicant that has great experience of doing things like this in the past not believe they needed planning permission in these particular circumstances? So I'm quite surprised, because, you know, one of the things you have to do usually when you put planning permission in is you have to consult with residents. So it would appear that maybe this applicant isn't willing to do that, or at some stage hasn't been willing to do it. So I do think it's probably incumbent on us as a committee to try and support the residents here in some way by putting some additional safeguards in for them.
Okay, Councillor Johnson, you have your hand up as well.
Thank you very much, Chair. In many respects, I agree with what Councillor Cave has just said. I think the most disappointing aspect of this application is the largely retrospective nature of it. I think it seems to me fairly cynical to go ahead with a series of works and attempt to circumnavigate the planning process by doing these things, and only then getting to the point where we've reached an application and discussion with officers. In saying that, I was very grateful this morning to have the opportunity to visit both Neighbours Gardens, Jubilee Lane, and the inside of the Albert Road Church, to get a feeling for the work that's already been carried out and the impacts upon the neighbours. I think it was I found it very useful to have the discussion regarding the obscuring of the glass, so Pilkington Level 3, looking over the neighbouring gardens on Clive Place and also onto Albert Road. I thought it was useful to have the discussion, understand the roof garden terrace and the fact that that's being conditioned not for use. In some respects, this is being very heavily conditioned. I think the officer said earlier that actually the D1 fallback use, so the amount that could be used for general community activity, had no restrictions on it in terms of time. Now that's going to be 10 p.m. That's large part of the building, because obviously that's includes the basement as well as elements on the ground floor. The B1 office elements are being given a 7:30 start, 8 o'clock finish. I don't know about other people on this committee, but I've often worked in my office until well after 8 o'clock in the evening, in a summer evening when it's nice and you want to get something done. I'm actually interested from a business perspective. Many people actually might find that a very tight restriction to be told that by the concierge or the manager for the premises that you've got to get out now at 8 o'clock in the evening. I think that's actually quite a strict restriction. I'll be interested to see how well that is policed over time, particularly, as I say, in summer months where people might work on into the evening. This is very close to Penarth Town Centre. This is not a place which is in the middle of a suburban location. It's I walked from the site through the centre of town and then down to to Cogan train station in what, a period of 10 minutes walking through most of Penarth. So it's actually quite well located for a sustainable travel situation, and therefore we've seen, in fact, with this applicant in the past, that the committee has rejected the United Reformed Church at Windsor on the basis of parking, and that was overturned by the planning inspector at the time back in 2017. So I think the applicant is aware of the the restrictions and lack of restrictions regarding parking availability within the centre of town. Similarly, I think I've heard a couple of people talk about the sustainability for offices, and there's a question I would have whether that's a matter for the planning committee or a matter for the business owner in terms of us zoning things for deciding what should or should not be office use. If it's not sustainable for office use, then I'm sure that the business owner will come back and say ask for changes later on. That really is my greater concern here, which is that this has been, as I say, is a largely retrospective planning application. I think our officers have done well in meeting many of the complaints that have naturally come in. My concern is that we have to spend a lot of time in ensuring that people stick to these objections. But on the face of it, those objections are in place. They're conditioned in regarding the obscuring of overlooking, regarding the non-use of the roof terrace. In fact, those are frankly quite dark offices, and I think we're actually at risk of over-conditioning something. Perhaps Penarth doesn't need offices and doesn't need jobs. That's a matter maybe for Penarth councillors to discuss with the Vale, but actually seems a better scheme than I've seen in some places. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Hodges, you have your hand up, and I propose to call Stephen in because he's got a long list of comments to address.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Chairman. I too attended the site visit today, and I found it most useful. One thing that always concerns me about the reuse of an old established prominent building such as a church like this, and we've had a few prominent buildings being reused, redesignated in Barry recently, is if it's not used, what will happen to it? Now, it's a county treasure. Well, that is little or no defence against demolition, shall I say. So I'm pleased to see this being brought into beneficial use. It's close to the town centre. I like to think that the users of it will be largely local. I can't imagine people attending from Cardiff or Barry or anywhere else perhaps to use it. I like to think they'll be mostly local, and in fact they'll probably walk or bike in. So I think the issue of cars and everything, apart from perhaps events in the D1 space downstairs, I think has been over exaggerated. Now, what I would say is I'm not very happy with applications coming to us retrospectively, but that's something that happens to many councils quite often, because simply we don't find out about them until perhaps they are either on the go or largely done. And there is a history with this developer of doing that, and had it in my ward. But what I would say is I think Penarth needs jobs, it needs support. Just walking there today from the train station at Cogan to attend the site visit, I noticed yet again since my last visit a few months ago that a number of shops and businesses have gone, and there's great stress in the town. And I think this can help, not only in terms of perhaps becoming incubator businesses perhaps, but also the fact that numbers of people attending there then using the shops after would be helpful. So I think the conditions have tidied it up. I think the officers have done a good job in tidying this up, and I like to make sure that well, we must keep an eye on to see that this is all completed to the conditions, and those conditions are adhered to. And if that is the case, I have no reason to say no, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hodges. I'm just to confirm, this has been on the go for must be 18 months at least, and Aruba and I have both been on the case because of changes in work, and local residents have been very upset with some of the things that have been gone, and a lot of the changes that have been conditioned within this and have already taken place have been as a result of the pressures that have been put on by planning department via on our behalf. Stephen, then.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Just sort of picking up on the retrospective nature of the application, as Councillor Hodges said, often authorities don't like to deal with retrospective applications because they can be very difficult. But the nature of the beast is once work is started, we don't know about it until it started. I know initially, I think there was a view from the developer that they didn't need a change of use for the proposed offices, and I think an application had come in just to make the external changes. So I think there was quite a bit of to and froing to get this application in, and that took quite some time. So again, from the developer's point of view, it's absolutely at his own risk, and particularly now as this application is obviously laid before yourselves as members of the planning committee to make a decision as to whether or not the works and the use taken place is acceptable. So he is fully aware of that, and we certainly don't condone retrospective applications, and they can be very, very difficult to deal with, particularly in relation to planning conditions and triggers, etc. There's quite a lot of discussion about the office use and need, etc. So just in terms of sort of national and local policy guidance, we actually have policies in the LDP that seek to retain office use. Equally, or contradictory, we don't have any actual policies that necessarily encourage office use. It's one of these things where it's proposed, it's in a settlement, it's in a very central location, subject to being policy compliant in terms of the general policies. There's not a concern against it. It's one of the it's use really that is market led. If the developer is happy that he's got a market for offices, we wouldn't challenge that. And it's the same sort of thing for sort of market housing often, to say, well, who's going to live in these houses? The fact that the private sector delivering it shows that there's a demand for it. So that's in terms of the office use. Just on the kind of the wider issues of removal of stained glass. So we have noted that has happened, which in terms of very localized impact, that has had an impact. Let me just share the screen so we can get a bit of a wider view of it. So the stained glass were in sort of the upper levels of these windows, but what we've also got to look at are the improvements that have been made to the building, particularly the opening up of the blocked up first floor windows. So by providing, even though there's no overlooking, by providing those kind of perceived windows from a safety point of view and secured by design point of view, that's a good thing, because you're providing almost a deemed level of activity on that lane, which prior to that there's lots of graffiti and that part of the lane wasn't overlooked at all. Not that it is now, but by certainly putting those windows in, it's giving the sort of a more of an active or semi-active frontage to that building. And so officers have looked at the development as a whole and the impact on the conservation area. And I think it's generally accepted that the Jubilee Lane elevation is a secondary elevation, although the building is very prominent from this Albert Road viewpoint. It's prominent on 3 elevations really, but generally whilst there are some negative elements, there are certainly some positive elements and repairing of stonework, etc. And most of all, as Councillor Hodges has said, bringing this building back, which is a county treasure, into a viable new use, from our point of view, will kind of preserve the long-term fabric of the building. With it being left semi-empty as a former church, the building's not being heated, so it's an accepted kind of conservation principle that bringing a building back can override some of the impacts of works to the building to accommodate its new use, and that's kind of an accepted accepted planning argument. Just in terms of the noise and disturbance of office use, so just draw members' attention to the fact that, you know, the principal entrance into the building is via this ramped access that we entered this morning. So say the point where you hit the pavement is going to be on Albert Road. You know, there'll be no activity as such down Jubilee Lane. So by having office use in the building, you know, the termination point where people will join the highway will be on Albert Road, again, which is a pretty busy road. As we said, it's very close to, you know, it's about 5 minutes walk away from Windsor Road roundabout. The area is a mix of kind of resident parking and shopping parking. So there is a general kind of bustle of activity. So, you know, whilst it is in a residential area, it's kind of semi-fringe in terms of the commercial and the retail area. And if you just go west, you know, there are some retail units further to the west. So just looking at my comments, see what else. Again, sort of the hours of use, sort of Councillor Johnson has said that in fact they could almost be argued as being quite restrictive. You know, we are aware that people these days do it perhaps more flexibly than the standard 9 to 5, especially post-COVID. And I think myself and perhaps a number of members were quite surprised this morning that a number of the units were actually in use. So I think if anything, that demonstrates that there is actually a demand for the units. And certainly even before planning permission has been granted, quite a number of those units were being occupied, and just typical desks with PCs, no discernible noise. In fact, walking down the corridors, we didn't even know they were being used until we tried to open the door and saw they were full of people. So I think if anything, that itself is a test to show that there is demand for the office use, although from a planning point of view, that demand or need doesn't have to be demonstrated by the applicant for us to consider an office use acceptable. I might have missed some points. I'm happy to come back on any further points. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, to confirm, there are retail directly across the road from there, and on the next block down from, if you're looking at this picture we've got here, if you go down there a little bit, just not very far at all, there's more retail there and across the road. So it's not well outside of the town centre. Right, Sandra, you have your hand up. Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to say that I concur with Councillor Johnson and Councillor Hodges on what they had to say on this, but I'd like to recommend that we move to officers' recommendations for this with the conditions that have been set in. So I'd like to move to a vote on this, please. So.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Williams. I see your hand, Councillor Payne, as well. Right. Do we need to vote on this? Do we have people in opposition, or can we move straight to acceptance?
I should be voting against the application.
You'll be voting in that case. In that case, we will. I'll hand over to Amy to do the roll call vote, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. If you give me 1 moment.
Yeah, I've got to find my paper.
Okay, thank you, committee. So I'll take the vote in alphabetical order, please. So beginning with Councillor Bruce.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Buckley.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Cave.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Champion.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Cowp.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Drake is absent. Moving to Councillor Ernest.
Against the application.
Thank you. Councillor Gilligan.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hodges.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Obliged. For.
Thank you. Councillor Payne.
Obliged. For.
Thank you. Councillor Perks.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Against.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Stallard.
Or Blyde, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
4 recommendations.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Wilson.
4 recommendations.
Thank you very much. Just counting that up for you now, Chair. I make that 10 for Chair and 6 against. So
I agree.
it's
Absolutely
carried
agree.
for.
Yep. Yep. So that's carried. Right. Thank you very much all for that. Moving on. The next on our list is 2020/01588 full, the old police station in Cowbridge Road. And if you bear with me a second, I just want to throw my dog out the room because she's going to start barking.
No problem, Chair.
Sorry about that. They think it's dinner time. So let's stop barking now. Right. I think, Ian, this is this you?
Yes, Chair.
Ian Robinson, right. In that case, could you introduce this, please?
Of course. Thanks, Chair. Yes, this next item is a planning application for the conversion of the former police station on Cowbridge Road in St Nicholas to 3 apartments. Just firstly to mention the matters arising note. This relates to additional comments submitted from St Nicholas and Bumbleston Community Council. They have reiterated objection to the scheme for the following grounds: that it's premature to seek alternative use for the building whilst it's in use, and providing employment and amenity would give uncertainty and potentially undermine the existing business. The existing building is well maintained. Services being delivered are enjoyed by residents and people from further afield. There's a shortage of D1 properties in the local area, and marketing for B1 office use in the case of the previous application at the site took place during the pandemic. So I'll share my screen so that members can see the plans. So this is the site, former police station, which is located in St Nicholas, in a predominantly residential area, residential to both sides and across the road. The application proposes the conversion of the building, as I said, to 3 flats, utilising the existing access off the A48 into a parking area to the front and side of the building. The key points I raised then in the matters arising are probably that the building formerly had a B1 use, and it was there was a previous planning application to convert it to this D1 use. Here's some photos here of the building in its context. When the previous planning application was approved for the D1 use, the applicant had to demonstrate through a marketing exercise that effectively the loss of the B1 was acceptable in principle. Steve mentioned on the previous application that there are policy requirements to kind of protect employment uses unless it can be demonstrated that there's not a viable need for them. That marketing process was undertaken, albeit during the pandemic. I think it would be very difficult to justify either refusing or delaying progress on all applications during the pandemic. I think we had to take sort of a rounded view of that and how that impacted upon kind of the validity of those assessments. That previous application was approved. It was demonstrated to satisfactorily that there wasn't a demand for that B1 space, and consequently the D1 use was approved. In terms of the principle of the use now, it's within a settlement in a predominantly residential area. So for that reason, we're of the view that a residential use is kind of compatible with existing surrounded uses and fundamentally acceptable in this kind of location. The existing D1 use doesn't have the same kind of policy protection that B1 uses do. There's not a policy in the LDP which specifically seeks to protect this kind of commercial enterprise in the same way that B uses are protected. That's not to diminish its importance or to say that it's that these kind of uses don't provide important contributions to local communities, particularly rural communities. It's just that there really is not a strong policy basis to defend the loss of it. I think, you know, a different kind of use, which was probably possibly more kind of integral to the community, and by that I mean, you know, a use which would be serving the community on a day-to-day basis in a kind of sustainable way. You really kind of serving the settlement, like for example, you know, a church hall or a you know, a village shop, for example. You know, there might be a kind of a bit of a stronger argument in terms of the contribution that the existing use makes to that settlement. I don't doubt that it does serve people from St Nicholas. I couldn't say exactly what the composition of uses are, but I very much doubt that the nature of custom there is kind of very much a St Nicholas, you know, based predominantly. Similarly, if you had a rural settlement with a kind of a defined commercial centre where you have shops and things, you know, this kind of use can be quite valuable in terms of, you know, linked trips, and, you know, customers coming to use the physiotherapy service might then go to the local shop, and there's that kind of like additional trade that would, you know, would benefit the settlement as a whole. Even if those circumstances were the case here, it would remain the case that there still isn't a policy position to defend the loss of it. So we can't say for definite that if this application were approved that it would mean the loss of the D1 use. I think it's, you know, it's quite possible that there would be, you know, increased pressure for the, you know, the occupant to vacate. It's speculation, but it's reasonable to think that the applicant may wish to implement their residential consent. But on the basis of the policy position, the LDP and national policy, we don't feel there is any justifiable reason to resist this residential use. Members will note that there's a requirement recommended for an affordable housing contribution in line with our policy. So if members are minded to resolve to approve the application tonight, that recommendation would be to approve subject to the applicant signing a legal agreement to deliver the affordable housing contribution. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Right, speakers on this. Councillor Perry, your local member, I'm assuming you'd like to speak to this.
Hi, Chair. Yeah, can I actually just listen first to what the other members say, and then come back at the end, if that's okay?
You can, yeah. It's just not usual for local member to be first in. Are there any other members who wish to comment on this particular application? I see no hands. It appeared not in that. Oh, there you go, Councillor Champion.
It's interesting that it's a D1 and a B2 or whatever. When it's an office, not an office, and when, you know, because these are treatment rooms and people, you know, it's almost like an office being used there, isn't it? And then you can have someone who's in an office that has someone who comes into them, and so it's a bit woolly, really, because there's a use there at the moment, and he's saying that he can't fill it with an office, and therefore it has to be changed to housing.
Ian, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're really not in the context of this application now. We're not considering the loss of B1. That was replicated in the report for kind of context and just to sort of demonstrate to members how that assessment was made that fed into this current application. But this proposal is not the loss of a B1 space. So there's no marketing, you know, required now in terms of that space. I agree with what Councillor Champion says in that, you know, D uses typically do have a level of employment, and any commercial use whatsoever, you know, retail, there's a level of employment there, but it's not structured and protected in the same way that the B uses are in not just local policy but in national policy as well.
Has it not got a B1 approval?
No, it was a B1 when it was formerly the police station. It subsequently has approval and is being used for a D use. So the B use has ceased. And so it's a D use now. So this is a proposal for a change of use from D1 to C3, which is residential.
Okay. In that case, I see no other hands up. Councillor Perry.
Here I go. Good afternoon. Yeah, just a few things. I mean, Gillian McCabe is now running the services there, and they've done a fantastic job on the renovation of the building. And it's a shame we haven't got more up-to-date photographs to show members. When it was changed from B1 to D1 use, it took about 8 months, and on balance, it was granted, I believe, looking at the report, in that it could be returned to B1 use, whereas with residential use, it's highly unlikely it could ever be returned to B1 use. As you've already said, the marketing occurred during the pandemic when we were all told to work from home, so people were vacating offices, whereas now in 2022 and going to 2023, people are beginning to move back into offices, as we heard earlier in this meeting in Penarth. John Marks responded in terms of planning policy with an objection. The objection was linked to a loss of B1, but also that there were 3 units squeezed into the building rather than 2. So that was their preference in 2020 for 2 units, not 3. And I think my other concern is this signals a preference for residential use of space within the Vale Glamorgan over business, and particularly in the rural parts of the Vale, we are very short of business use space. So I think I'll leave it there for other members.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Ian, do you want to come back on that? Any comments?
I can do. I've not got a great deal different to say. I agree it was during the pandemic. As I said, I think it's, you know, we still have to make a decision on applications during the pandemic. I mean, it's not that we're preferential to residential than employment. It's all about whether there is identified harm that runs contrary to policy. And yes, I see that sometimes there's a concern that residential is the kind of the use that people will seek to propose above commercial uses. It probably gives developers more certainty and maybe more return, or more short-term return. But we need to really focus on, you know, on the planning policies. In terms of previously, whether it was reasoned that it could return to B1, I think, yes, in the context of assessing the D1 use, probably relevant to note that, yes, allowing a conversion to D1 may enable then a return to B1. We couldn't insist that happened or control that happened. But again, these really are issues that were fundamental to the previous application, not to this application in terms of loss of B1. So I'm just concerned to flag that we're not making the focus of this assessment loss of B1, because that's not what the application is.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Perry, this will need to be your last contribution, because I'm not proposing to have a long discussion between 2 people.
Yeah, it's just that this is now, application is now 2 years old, and obviously the D1 change of use has happened. It's come, it's gone, it's been actioned. So I'm just a bit confused as to why this has come forward now and it's not been deferred indefinitely or refused. It's just a little bit confusing in the timescale. Doesn't seem logical to me.
I think the last portion of the life of this application has been with the legal officer, because this was due to be determined under delegated powers, and there's been legal drafting for the agreement for the affordable housing contribution I referred to. Obviously, it's been called into planning committee now, so that's elongated the process. But you know, that's kind of I couldn't go into detail on the front end of it. I wasn't the case officer, and I don't know the fine detail of the earlier part of the application, but that's why the latter stages have taken the time they have.
Thank you very much. Right, I don't see any of the hands up on this, and Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I'm happy to move to officers' recommendations.
Thank you very much.
I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Do we have any votes against that would indicate that we need to go to a list vote? Councillor Perry has his hand up. In that case, Amy, could you please go through the procedure?
Absolutely, Chair. So taking the vote in alphabetical order, please, starting with Councillor Bruce.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Buckley.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Cave.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Champion.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Cowp.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Drake is absent. Moving to Councillor Ernest.
For the application.
Thank you. Councillor Gilligan.
For the application.
Thank you. Councillor Hodges.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Obliged. 4.
Thank you. Councillor Payne.
Obliged. 4.
Thank you. Councillor Perks.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Against officer recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Stallard.
Obliged. 4.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Full recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Wilson.
Because I didn't hear all those proceedings, I'm abstaining.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. So counting that for you now, Chair. That's 11 for, Chair, 4 against and 1 abstention. So that's carried.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for that. Moving on then to agenda item 9, 2022 00232 oblique full 36 Pill Street, Cogan.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, thank you.
Stephen, you're introducing this, yeah?
Yeah. So, as you've said, this is an application at a mid-terrace dwelling in Cogan. We just run up for the plans. So the application as amended, again, it is a retrospective application. Seeks consent to retain a single-storey rear extension, first floor rear extension, loft conversion, including rear dormer, with alteration to a rear garage to convert the whole property into 2 self-contained 2-bedroom flats, which was originally approved back in 2020. So we're not considering the principle of the conversion to 2 flats. It's effectively just the external changes that have been made to the scheme that's been previously approved. So we'll just move a bit quicker. Just run down to the principal change. So the principal change really is the fact that the image on your left was the single-storey flat roof extension with a central glazed lantern roof. That hasn't been built. What has been built now is a gabled extension. So the first floor extension as well that's also part of the element, but in particular this part has been built with a gabled roof, and it has been built over the adjoining boundary with the neighbour. The approved scheme was certainly the first floor extension, we would say, is on the boundary, but the ground floor flat roof element was inset. So again, this application has been brought to our attention, which is subject to an enforcement complaint. Again, enforcement officers visited the site and noted that the works were not being built in accordance with the plans. This application is to retain the works as built. What we can see here is a view from the rear garden of number 37, where you can see that the side wall of the single-storey extension has been built over the boundary, as has the first floor extension. In terms of reference, members can see the approximate sort of line between the 2 properties and can see how much of that is built over the boundary. So approximately, the officer says it's approximately 20 centimetres of projection onto the adjoining land, which is owned by number 37. Just briefly, in terms of, I know there has been concern about the authority dealing with and potentially approving applications where there is an encroachment onto third-party land. So for members' information, planning permission can be applied by anyone on any land that they do not own or control. The applicant or the agent, however, must complete certificate B of the application form, and then they must then serve notice on the relevant landowner. This has now been done in respect of this application. So from our point of view, it is a valid application. In terms of how we assess applications, with particularly in respect of, if you want to call it encroachment, the planning system is essentially concerned with the use and development of land, and the grant of any planning permission is not equal to granting ownership of land. Again, planning is just one form of a consent that may be required in respect of development. As the report has said, whilst the encroachment by 20 centimetres does obviously bring this development closer to the patio and the garden area of this property, it's still nevertheless considered acceptable, as is this encroachment. Some work has been done in terms of creating this kind of internal gutter in terms of draining the surface water from the two roofs. So again, whilst it's a retrospective application, which again we certainly don't encourage, it's regrettable. Again, we've been ended in the situation of having to determine an application, and again, it is at the developer's own risk. But just so members are aware that if we were to grant planning permission, it does not in any way convey or authorise that the council is accepting this encroachment of development onto third-party land, and it would not prejudice the ability of the affected neighbour to take their own legal or civil action regarding any encroachment. And any discussions or disputes regarding boundary or legal disputes are purely civil matters between both parties to resolve. Say the report presented to you just looks at the planning considerations of the application. It has considered the extra impact by virtue of the encroachment, but just the massing and the proximity of that massing to the windows at the rear of the property and also the patio area. Happy to take any questions on that, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Councillor Buckley, I think you wanted to speak to this as local member. You're a member of the committee, so there's no time limit for you.
Thank you, Chair. The neighbours aren't able to attend tonight, so if I can read to you what they've sent me, because the complaints that they've got over the building is not just the encroachment onto the neighbour's land. The ground level of the original rear annex of the building and the new extension has been raised by nearly a metre over the original ground level. It's the only building along this street where this has been done, and it's been done without any consultation with the neighbours or the planning authorities, and is in breach of their original planning application. The raising of the ground level has necessitated a change in design of the roof on the extension from a flat roof to a pitch roof to allow for sufficient headroom internally. This has increased the overall height of the extension from the original planned height of 2.9 metres to a height of apex 3.7 metres. The length and width of the extension has also been built beyond the original dimensions in breach of the original plans. 5.4 versus 5.1 metres and 3.7 versus 3.5 metres in width. The boundary of the extension with number 37 has been built across without consent, and although trespass is not covered under the responsibility of the planning process, this should be considered as intrusive and significantly contributing to the overbearing presence of the extension, in particular to number 7. The combination of these points is a concern, as the extension being built for commercial gain is out of character with the rest of the street. Well, the commercial gain stuff we can't really go into. What I would say, where the overbearing side of it comes in on the planning, Overbearing planning is a term used to describe the impact a development will have on its surroundings, particularly a neighbouring property, in terms of scale, massing, dominating effects, and overbearing planning is often a reason for rejection for planning applications since it's subjective and can be overturned at appeal. What I would say, where the neighbours have said this is the only house in the street that is raised up the floor level at the rear of the property, they're incorrect there. It's the only house in the whole village of Cogan where they've built up the floor level on the back. It's the old terraced houses where there's 2 or 3 steps down to the rear kitchen level. The work was done against what was originally asked for, so I'm asking members to object or reject, whatever the term is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Anybody else want to join this debate? Councillor Bruce.
Yes, surely the encroachment would set a precedent for future people looking at doing the same thing, encroaching on other people's land.
Thank you, Councillor Bruce. I think Steve already addressed that. Anybody can apply to and build on somebody else's land. It becomes a matter of civil law. It feels really against natural justice, doesn't it? But unfortunately, it isn't. Well, it's not against what passes for justice sometimes. Mark Wilson, Councillor Wilson, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I mean, I'm very sympathetic to the neighbours here on this, but also I think you go through something like what we call the tort of nuisance, because it sounds as though that, there seems to be some sort of civil legal matter here in terms of this, because obviously if you're going to be building on someone else's land, I would have thought you need permission to build on someone else's land. And therefore, I think, there's a question of a civil matter. Because after all, there's many applications, as you and I know, that get passed that don't get built afterwards because of these sorts of matters. So, the fact that, what might happen today is that, I'm not predetermining what's going to happen today, but if, say, for instance, the committee do mind to pass this, that doesn't mean it's going to get built. But what, of course, is the issue, of course, is, what has been built already. And that's a question of, I think, solicitors on both sides will have to discuss. So thank you.
Yeah, you're quite right. I think that it is a civil matter, which means that it isn't actually a planning matter anymore. Councillor Ernest.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. My thinking on this, I agree with most of the comments being made already, is what about the Party Wall Act? I'm wondering whether notice was served by the applicant on the adjoining property. I know that's a civil matter as well. Could I just ask Steve whether he would just comment on any implications for the Party Wall Act? Yeah, thank you.
You can. Unfortunately, I'm not aware.
Councillor Butler, come back. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I call you. Yes, Mr.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm not aware that that's happened, but as you correctly say, Councillor, it's a private matter, and planning officers wouldn't, and it's not their role. And similarly with building control, it's not their role to ensure whether party wall agreements are or aren't in place. That's why the planning system is set up for the way it is, and that's exactly why the party wall system was set up 20 or so years ago, to administer and to deal with these matters as a separate act out of the hands of building control or planning. And it is, as we said, it's a civil matter between two parties. I don't mind coming back on just a couple of other points, just to pick up the point that Councillor Buckley has said in relation to raising of the floor levels. He's absolutely correct. So members can probably see that the approved scheme had a significantly lower floor level, where you would step down internally, which obviously results in a lower roof and a lower ceiling height. So by actually raising it up from the lower garden level, this has had an impact in terms of headroom, and therefore required the ceiling height to be lifted. I mean, there's not necessarily a problem with that in itself. It's just the impact that has. I mean, to some degree, the the opportunity is that we can now see the impact of the development as built, whereas, you know, in 99% of the cases, officers have to look at plans, and that's the way it absolutely should be. But here we can actually see the impacts. And again, as I've said as we've said in the report, whilst it does result in some extra impact, you know, we feel that those impacts are relatively negligible, and we don't feel it would unreasonably enclose the outlook. Don't forget, we've got to imagine how the approved scheme would be if it was to be built in that picture, and the difference between the two, not just the impact of that proposal. We're looking at the, you know, again, we talk about the fallback position. If they were to demolish that and build what they had approval for, and how materially how different that would be. So, you know, I think this is a really good photo. It does show very clearly the impacts on that property, and it's very clear to see the degree of impact. But say, as the officer has said, you know, we feel that the level of impact is in this point acceptable in relation to the ground floor extension and the first floor. And again, in terms of the encroachment, we are not setting any precedent at all. In fact, very many applications we receive do serve notice on their adjoining owners, even if it's smaller elements such as overhanging rainwater goods or drainage or foundations. And very often you will get a new wall built as a party wall, partly over the boundary. So we do actually have a lot of applications that do propose to build on neighbouring properties. In the vast majority of the cases, that's done with obviously with the agreement of the neighbour or whatever parties involved. In this instance, that hasn't happened, and it's highly, you know, regretful that you know, this situation has arisen. But all I would urge members to consider is that we are looking at the planning merits of the case. The trespass or the encroachment matters are civil matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Right, we have a number of hands up again. Councillor Williams first.
Yeah, thanks. I must admit, I am struggling with this one, only because we have a planning application that was approved, and yet the scheme hasn't been fulfilled in that respect. So I'm just curious as to why that wasn't dealt with, rather than have another application come through. It's just unacceptable, isn't it? That somebody puts an application in, it gets approved on the basis of what the scheme that we had at the time, and here we are saying, well, okay, that's not built. I just don't understand how we can accept that as a planning committee. So
yeah, if I just come back on that point, I mean, obviously, just because we approved a scheme previously, it doesn't mean that that's the only thing that could possibly be approved at that site. I mean, if the application we're dealing with now had just come in ahead of time prior to it being built, I'm pretty sure we'd have considered it in the, you know, pretty much in the same way. We certainly would have picked up the fact it was overhanging and ensure that they had done due diligence in terms of serving notice. But obviously, our enforcement team. Sorry.
Why isn't the scheme that's already been approved? Why hasn't that been complied with?
I can't. That's not that right. The non-compliance of that scheme is down to the landowner and the builder.
And what can we do about that?
So what can we do? So obviously our enforcement team have looked at it. They've clearly picked up there's a significant deviation from what's been approved. In their assessment, they would look at whether or not what has been built is likely to be acceptable or could be made acceptable by way of planning condition. So that's what they have to look at. Now they've looked at it, and they would then discuss, and they often discuss it with myself or Ian or whoever, and we've looked at it and we thought, okay, it is different, but it's you know, it's the sort of thing that we could certainly consider. And they were still building on, when the application came in, they were still continuing to build on site. So even when that came in retrospectively, things were even changed during the application, particularly that gutter detail on the boundary. So again, always with all retrospective applications, you know, they are tricky, they can be tricky things to deal with. But in this instance, just because something is different to what's been approved, we can't say no to something that's different if the different thing is potentially acceptable. It's purely at their own risk that they've gone ahead and done this. Don't get me wrong, and it's not a position that they should be in, or, you know, ideally we should be in. particularly in respect of, you know, the impacts and the encroachment onto the neighbour. But you know, there are a number of ways you could extend this property, and you know, what's before you now, from officer's point of view, is considered acceptable.
Thank you, Steve. Right, next hand up I see is Ian, but I propose to leave, Councillor Buckley, but I propose to leave you a bit, if you don't mind, and bring in Councillor Payne and Councillor Cave before you, and you can perhaps sum up your point of view. So Councillor Payne, please.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think it's acceptable. I don't think the retrospective nature is acceptable either. And I just think about if it was me and that was my garden, that's my perspective on it. I think it's a bit of a cheek, really. I understand the planning application, but what about Stephen then now, if that neighbour puts in a planning application for their boundary on their land? That's
well, yes, I mean they I mean they could. Again, we would be happy to accept that. But this is the issue: is whether or not they have the ability and the legal right to build it. And that's the thing, that's what I think we have to consider in planning.
Yeah.
Even though I think no one's in disagreement of what the situation that has arisen here is far from ideal. I think we all agree that. But we have to look at what the planning system is set up to do, and that is effectively to deal with the use of development on land. And to some degree, land ownership is not usually of relevance. It is for the person of the developer, because they need to make sure they can develop and comply with planning conditions. It's, I mean, I would not want to build on someone else's land, because how on earth are they go? Firstly, that, you know, I don't want to say too much, because obviously there's a separate legal matter going on. But in terms of your security of something that you've built and it's on someone else's land,
totally.
You know, I'll just leave it there. But yeah,
I think better. Right, Councillor Cave, and then Ian Robinson wants the.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is another application that is retrospective, or has been a bit deviant from what has been approved. And I just wonder, as a committee, you know, when we see applications, we think in good faith, don't we, that they're going to be built along the lines of that which is before us, really. And so I do wonder, do we as a council collect figures on the number of properties that we give planning permission for that then deviate from that planning permission? Because it does seem to me that, yes, there's lots of risk involved here, isn't there, from deviating from planning permission. But if we as a council, as a planning committee, are then going to rubber stamp any of these deviances from the original applications, it doesn't seem to me that there's very much of there's not very much here to stop people from doing that. So I do wonder, do we have any figures?
I mean, obviously, you know, let's say quite simply that, you know, the vast majority of the applications we deal with annually are household applications, very typical to this. And our enforcement team, which is against the public register, do deal with a significant number of complaints from neighbours in relation to infringements. Some very minor in respect of, you know, relocation of windows and materials and finishes. Some very apparent in the case of this, when something is being built totally differently. There are a couple of processes to resolve that. There's what's called a non-material amendment application, where again, our enforcement team would consider whether or not those changes are very, very minor, as in non-material, and then there's a process where the applicant or the agent can submit an application, and we can deal with that informally in-house and agree it as what's called a non-material amendment. But the test for a non-material amendment is quite a high bar in terms of its impact, how it impacts on third parties, the visual impact of it, and whether there's a significant change or impact from the previously approved scheme. So there's that side of it, and then there's also a more major departure where there's no way that we can consider it forms part of a revision to the original scheme, that a new application is submitted. And we do deal with a good number. So
do we have the figures?
We don't have the figures. I mean,
it would be
could
good.
Possibly, again, we could possibly as
Yeah.
Ian said with previous discussion, we could probably get those figures.
I just think about, you know, as a committee trying to dissuade people from doing things like this, that, you know, if we had figures and we had figures where we then take some sort of enforcement action on a percentage,
Yeah.
that might be something that would help us as the committee dissuade people from doing this type of action.
I expect the vast majority of the figures would likely show that when we deal with retrospective applications, they are approved, because of the fact that if they're not approved, they would be coming before yourselves to authorise enforcement action.
And that's, I guess this is
Councillor Cave,
gone in circles here with the argument.
I don't
here,
want this
because
to
if-
end up as a discussion between two people again. As I said
But we
to
don't
Councillor
want this
Perry
type
before.
of thing keep happening either. And as
I-
joy as a committee, we
think-
do have some
I
responsibility
think you've
here
made your point,
to
and I
other,
agree with
you know,
your point.
everybody else like neighbours and so forth, so
Christine,
that it doesn't.
Christine, don't speak over me.
I think
As
you're
I said,
speaking over me, actually.
No, yes, I'm the chair. I'm allowed. Thank you. As I said with Councillor Perry earlier, all discussion should be coming through the chair. It isn't. I don't want to encourage discussion between two individuals when in the committee, and I think you've made your point, which I actually agree with. To be truthful.
Great.
I've voiced my view on retrospective applications many times, as a lot of you can confirm. Councillor Hodges, no, sorry, I said I'd bring in Ian Robinson next, and then I'll bring in you, Nick.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to flag a point regarding enforcement. You know, if committee were minded that they weren't going to accept the application and felt that there was a planning reason to refuse it, which obviously would have to compose, it would naturally follow, if the application were being refused, that we'd look to take enforcement action, I would suggest, because we've deemed there to be harm if we're refusing it. I just think in that context, it might be worth having a quick bit of advice from the legal officer, because when we serve an enforcement notice, we generally speaking, the notice is served on the owner of the land where the breach sits. Now, what we wouldn't realistically be able to do is serve an enforcement notice to say, remove the whole development. You should enforce in a way that kind of remedies the harm. So the harmful bit probably would be the bit which is overlapping. Aside from issues of service and who it's served on, I would just want a bit of comfort about whether the council can legally require somebody to remove a development that isn't on their land. So, you know, if we were to enforce it, we'd be saying to the developer, you have to go and remove something, but they have to trespass to remove it. I know it sounds like a bit of a technicality, but it's something worth thinking about, because you know, these legal matters are pretty complex. So I wouldn't mind a bit of advice from the legal officer, whether now or if at the point that members are of that view. But at some point, I think we should have that advice.
Yeah, I think it's almost the same issue in reverse, in terms of, I think you could serve the enforcement notice on the developer who's undertaking the development. I think the issue may come with, in a roundabout way, to undertake the works to remove what they've done. They'd be in the same position in terms of they'd have to trespass on land, but they've already done that. Again, that falls to be a private matter. So we wouldn't be able to permit them to carry out the works that we were requiring of them, and it may be a defence for them to say they couldn't get the permission. But I would imagine that in the event that they were being asked to remove that, then permission would likely be forthcoming from the neighbour in those circumstances, because it would be to their benefit.
Thank you. Right, Nick, next.
Thank you, Chairman. So many questions. One which has just been largely answered there. I'm interested in what Christine said, where basically, you know, numbers of things being built off plan. And one thing I did suggest a few years ago, which was poo-pooed, but seems to be becoming more popular now in idea, is that certainly on more major schemes, that once they're built, we as a committee actually revisit them to check that they've actually been built to how we actually wanted them, and if any lessons or could be learned by us as a committee or officers or whatever. That's something I'd just like to throw out there for fun. But one thing I'd like to think is the developer, the householder who's had the planning permission has now built this the way they have. The way it's been built, I mean, just to paint that wall and everything means that they obviously came over onto the neighbour's land to get that done as well. So there's all those questions. But really what I'd like to know is, and it's possibly not a planning question, but it's something I think that needs to be considered and thought of, especially if we are potentially considering refusing this, as I think some people are starting to suggest, is the building as built, which now encroaches and is now potentially or is causing a land ownership question. What protection has the developer who's built it as such got if and when they want to sell their property? And I'm certainly willing to take more argument about our ability to refuse this.
Thanks, Councillor Hodges. I know, Ian, you've been hanging on, but I mean, do you want to come in now, or would you rather wait till the end and sum up? I mean, you have moved refusal. Well, it hasn't been seconded yet, but you did move for refusal early on.
I'll second the application, Chairman.
Second refusal.
Ian's, yes,
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. If I could just come in to say, if you take the encroachment onto the neighbour's property out of the equation, the raising of the floor level of the rear of the thing by nearly a metre would have been turned down, I would like to think, on those grounds alone. Now, our enforcement team, myself and Councillor Birch, have called down this. You can see the building's nearly finished now, and the builder has carried on regardless, even though they'd known that all these things were being looked into. So, as I say, I know the building on the other land is not a planning matter, but the raising of the floor 800 mil over what we'd agreed, I think is a planning matter.
Right.
That's all I got to say. Yeah. Thank you.
Right. Ian Robinson now, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'll just come back on to a couple of the points. I couldn't answer Councillor Hodges' question. I'm sorry, about protection that the owner would have. Just before I forget, I just want to say something about the numbers, which I know members are understandably sort of keen to understand more about. I'm certainly happy to commit to look at it. I'm just conscious that it's potentially a very difficult and very time-consuming thing to try and get an accurate answer for. A lot of these things happen where we have enforcement cases and where we might take action where there's never been a planning application. It might be something which is permitted development or is slightly bigger, but not deemed to be expedient to enforce. So it's not simply a case of looking at planning permissions granted. There's probably a number out there we don't even know about. And even if there are some that we can try and sort of filter out of our overall figures, there's no particularly easy way to sort of search those fields within our system. You're kind of searching random keywords to try and sort of find these examples. So I'm not saying we can't look at it, but I just want to flag that it's not an easy thing to do, and I couldn't say for definite that I could come back and say right accurately it's 6% of everything. Just wanted to flag that. Yeah, in terms of Councillor Buckley's comments, I think if members are minded to refuse the application, I would say, whether something's overbearing is definitely a planning reason, and I think an increase in height is a legitimate point. Whilst we're saying that the encroachment itself is not a planning issue, it may be members' views that the fact that it's closer makes it physically more overbearing. I mean, officers have set out that, you know, what our position was in respect of those issues, but I would say if members were minded to refuse it, then it may be that the reason for refusal would comprise elements relating to additional height and additional proximity and sort of the combination of effects. So if that's the way that members are minded to vote, then obviously we can look at composing a reason that reflects that.
Thank you, Ian. James, you wanted to come back in on a legal matter.
No, sorry, Chair. I was just to make the point regarding what the reason for refusal was post the movement.
Okay. The feeling I think is that it's overbearing.
Yeah, I was going to say Ian's kind of just we just need clarification before.
The point that was made earlier about the owners trying to sell, and how that's going to pan out with solicitors where they're trying to sell something that's not theirs to sell, in that it's on the neighbour's land. I mean, that's kind of an interesting point. I don't expect an answer. I'm just intrigued by it. Right. We have a seconded motion to reject this application and reject officers' recommendations. Councillor Stallard, do you have a hand up?
Sorry, yes, just to ask a question. If we do refuse officers' recommendations, what happens?
The applicant can go to appeal, and if they don't go to appeal, they can comply with what we are saying, which will go on. Sorry, someone else.
We would be as part of the refusal, as I said, as Ian has said, on overbearing impact. We would be it would be a dual recommendation to serve enforcement action to remedy the breach.
Which would mean they'd have to knock it down and
we'd have to
take down that wall.
As Ian has said, we have to look at what the terms of enforcement notice would be. It could be remove it, and you know, the fallback position obviously is the fact that we've already approved something in its place, so they can either revert back to the approved consent, demolish, or it
sounds quite drastic, but.
I mean, this is unfortunately the position that this is the risk. I think we've discussed the risk of getting themselves into this position where we're now talking about knocking parts of buildings down. I think that's probably a demonstration more than anything that of the risks of retrospective applications, particularly those built on third-party land.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just add? Sorry, can I just add to that? Yeah, we'd have to say an enforcement notice would have to give the developer the option of reverting to effectively amending what they've built to be in line with what they already have permission for. We could also consider whether effectively, removing part of it, but allowing them to keep the new height if it was set further off the boundary. It's difficult when you're trying to sort of be very prescriptive in an enforcement notice. I mean, it's easier to say, either demolish it or revert to what you got permission for. The only other thing I wanted to raise was, it feels like, correct me if I'm wrong, any member, it feels like the bulk of the harm that we've been talking about is the kind of the single story extension adjacent to the patio. Now, that's not to say that members may not feel there's harm attributable to the first floor element as well, albeit that sits adjacent to a ground floor extension. So that first floor bit doesn't, if you like, sit immediately adjacent to the garden in the same way that the ground floor bit does. So hypothetically, we would need to consider, if we were going to refuse it and recommend enforcement action, does that relate to setting the entire development off the boundary, or just the bit which sits, for example, next to the patio? Because it may be the case that members feel there's a distinction between the level of harm created by the different sections.
Councillor Wilson first.
Thank you very much, Chair. I mean, I think we've had a good discussion today, and I think one of the things that I do read when I read appeals, successful and unsuccessful, one of the things the inspectors often talk about is context. And I think this is vital here, because if you look at the context there of this relatively small property and relatively small gardener, to do something quite dramatic in that context is normally a good defence on an appeal situation. So, I mean, in reference to Councillor Stallard's approach, enforcement is something that is serious and significant. undoubtedly so. But sometimes, you know, if we are minded to refuse the application, then, you know, enforcement has those legal powers to do that. And as Ian Robertson rightly said, of course, you know, we have got an existing plan application on the table at the moment. Why can't we just, you know, owners should comply? My feeling is anyone, an applicant, should comply with an existing application as a matter of good faith. And I think that's what's been broken here. And I think that's why I think quite a lot of the planning members think this is, you know, wrong, morally wrong, you know. But, you know, that's open to other people's thinking as well.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I think you're right. I mean, the feeling that I'm getting from members is that we think that natural justice is not being served here, and that the application as originally approved should have been built, and that the changes they've made are extreme enough that they need to revert to that original application. Councillor Buckley, you have your hand up for a last time on this one.
For the last time, Chair, and I do apologise to all the members for harping on again. What I was going to say was the original plan, which hasn't been built to, was generous in itself when you compare it to every other property down in that village. So they had been granted scope to do more than what anyone else had done, or most people had done down there, but they still totally ignored what we've said. Right. Where we said about setting a precedent earlier, if we're letting people, if one person gets away with ignoring what we've asked them to, or said they can build and build their own, then everyone else is going to, from here on in, is probably going to do it. Sorry, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Amy, given the nature of the discussion and so on, and the motion to reject officers' recommendations, and which has been seconded, I propose that we move straight to a table vote.
Okay, Chair. Yes, no problem at all. So we're obviously voting this evening for refusal of the application.
Yeah. So, yeah. So
sorry, are we also voting to authorise enforcement action at the same time?
I was about to chip in and say we are voting for refusal and for enforcement action. So if you are for refusal and for enforcement, then say for. If you're against, then
Chair, can I just add one point? Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. I want to add this point before the vote takes place. Can I just establish that whether before the vote takes place, do we need to clarify when we're talking about voting for enforcement action? Do we need to clarify the extent of action we're talking about, i.e., the issue I just talked about? Then, are we just talking about the bit that sits adjacent to the patio, or are members voting for enforcement action to set the entire thing off? Because I think we need.
I think the entire thing, because I think that's the tenor of the meeting. Yeah. Is that we are not happy with these people building off plan from what was agreed, and building and encroaching on the property of the neighbour, and the fact that it happens at ground floor, or I mean, if we was to say, oh, it's okay to have this thing sort of looming over the building, they could build it sort of another metre across. And
that's fine.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be sure that we were clear on that was the nature of the recommendation.
I mean, does anybody disagree with that?
No, I'm supporting Councillor, as second, I'm supporting Councillor Buckley's viewpoint, which has just been discussed now.
Yeah, which is revert to the original plan. Councillor Charles, Champion rather. Charles.
Yeah,
Champion.
thanks. Should we not be voting against the officer's recommendation, which would therefore?
No, the motion is a negative motion from Councillor Buckley, and that's what we're voting on. So we're voting for Councillor Buckley's motion, which is to reject officer's recommendation and to add for enforcement. So you vote for if you want to reject officer's recommendations and for enforcement, and against if you want to go with officer's recommendations. Is that clear?
Are we clear on the reasons for refusal? Ian.
The reason for refusal is it's overbearing
in planning. Fine, that's fine.
I think I would say something along the lines of, but by reason of its height, depth, and position immediately adjacent to the neighbours' amenity area, the development would be overbearing, would dominate the outlook from the neighbouring property, and would be overbearing and unneighbourly. It would therefore conflict with policies MD2 and MD5, I think, of the local development plan. And some extracts from our residential and householder SPG, which talks about the relationship between extensions and neighbouring properties.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, is that all right? Right, Amy, please.
Yes,
Take
yes, Chair. Okay, thank you very much. So can I take the vote first, please, from Councillor Bruce?
For the motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Buckley?
For the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Cave?
For the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Champion?
For the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Cowp?
For the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Drake is absent, so going to Councillor Ernest.
For the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Gilligan?
For the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Hodges?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson?
Bob Lyder Koenig, for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Payne?
Obliged for.
Thank you. Councillor Perks?
For the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Perry?
For the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Stallard?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Williams?
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Wilson?
For.
Thank you, Chair.
Unanimous.
That vote is unanimous.
Thank you all. Right, we've been at this for 2 hours. Can I propose a 5 minutes comfort break? Especially for us older people. 5 minutes then. So we'll be back at 10 past.
Thank you, Chair.
Is this one of yours?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah. Ian, if you can take us through this, then I'll call in Catherine Lewis if she's still with us.
If I may, Chair, as well, just to take the opportunity for the sake of the live stream that is now is streaming again, just to confirm for any observers that Councillor Ernest has withdrawn for this item.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy. Okay, so we're back in the room, and Ian, if you can take us through this, and then I'll call in Ms. Lewis.
Thank you. This is an application for extensions and works for the dwelling at 96 Lavenock Road. The works comprise sort of relatively minor alterations to the porch and fenestration and treatment of the front elevation of the building, and then to the rear, single story and first floor extensions and a dormer extension. So this this plan here shows the dormer at roof level. It shows the first floor extension here, and then the single story extension that stretches across the back of the property. A balcony terrace area here adjacent to the first floor extension. It's probably a this plan here shows that the first floor extension has got a doorway and glazing that comes out onto the balcony, and then a 1.8 metre high screen located, if members can see in the area I'm sort of drawing a line with my arrow here. So the main issues that officers have had in looking at this application has been the visual impact and design, and principally the impact on the neighbour, particularly the neighbour to the left hand side on this plan here. Some members, I think, visited that property this morning as part of site visits. Officers were of the view that the treatment to the front of the dwelling is acceptable in what is a relatively mixed context in terms of the appearance and character and design of dwellings on Lavenock Road. In terms of the extension itself, the first floor extension is set reasonably well off both boundaries. So the key issue, probably fair to say, is the relationship between the single story element and this neighbouring property here, and the effect that it has on outlook from windows and the garden of the property that I think our speaker is going to speak to shortly. If I just enlarge this, this photograph here shows the view from the property in question. The development was amended through the course of the application to set the parapet roof in particular further away from the boundary. These wooden sticks here, I think, indicate the height. Officers' view on this is that whilst it will be clearly visible to the neighbour and will have an effect to some degree on the outlook across this part of their boundary, we didn't feel that the development was unduly overbearing or harmful, and consequently the recommendation is for approval.
Thank you, Ian. Right, as I said earlier, we do have a public speaker on this, Catherine Lewis. Hello, Ms. Lewis.
Hello, thank you.
You have 3 minutes as per the previous applications that we've had speakers on, and Amy will give you a warning 1 minute from the end. And you've seen the procedure, so when you start.
Thank you. I live with my family at 94 Lavenock Road, the neighbouring property, and we don't accept that the planning officers considered and applied the planning policies and guidance properly, especially the impact on us as neighbours, which is one of the major considerations identified. Our main concern relates to the ground floor extension and the size and presence of the extension in its proposed location along our boundary, which will have a significant overbearing impact on our amenity, privacy and general internal and external living environment. The Residential and Householder Development SPG states that the impact on neighbours should be minimised by any extension, and this design doesn't minimise an impact on us. Our existing residential amenity, which we have enjoyed for 10 years, has not been safeguarded. National Planning Policy, the LDP and SPG clearly states that the local authority owe us a duty to consider this properly. And until today, the planning officer had not even been to our property to consider its effect from our side, despite requests, but has come to an automatic conclusion based on drawings. He, however, concedes that the extension is tall and that there is a difference in levels. He concedes that there will be an impact on us and that the extension will be harmful to us. He is willing to approve the plans, therefore, as they would be allowed as a permitted development. And this is a planning application, of course, being considered on its merits today. And in any event, the extension would not be permitted as the materials being used would not be allowed in the permitted development, and neither would the measurements proposed. The measurements are also not accepted by us as accurate given the gradient in our patio area, and the plans mislead how the extension will look on the ground. The impact on light is acknowledged in the report, but quickly dismissed by the planning officer, who says it will only affect our garden. That is wrong when there is a habitable room, being our dining room, within 2 meters of the extension, as well as the kitchen diner. The natural light into both rooms, which have floor to ceiling windows, will be severely affected. No reference whatsoever is made to the dining room in the report, meaning that no consideration has been given to the impact on that room as is required in order to comply with the policies. 2 final points. The screen on the flat roof will be of black solid material. This resolves overlooking, but ignores the fact that it exacerbates the extension's overbearing effect. And we're also at a loss as to how a balcony can be allowed, as the views from the current windows will not be the same as from the balcony, as the balcony will be 4 meters closer to overlooking our garden. So to conclude, therefore, we say that inadequate consideration has been given to the design policy requirements for the inevitable impact on us as neighbours, which the planning officer concedes in his report. This application shouldn't be approved as currently designed.
Minutes, Chair.
Due to the negative impact on the amenity and enjoyment of our property, which I ask all of you, please, not to underestimate.
Thank you very
for your
much.
time.
Right, just stay on. Are there any points of clarification that any members of the committee would like to raise with Ms. Lewis? I see no hands. Right, in that case, thank you, Catherine. If you want to turn your camera off and your mic off now, we'll go on to the discussion. Right, first of all, Ian, is there anything you want to raise now in the light of what
Yes,
Ms. Lewis has said?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of points of clarification. Reference to permitted development is not to say that the development is permitted. The reference was drawn to permitted development in the report to suggest that what's proposed isn't significantly or materially different. But materially is probably an unfortunate choice of word, given that there was specific reference there to materials. I'm talking about, would we see a difference between what could be done without permission and this that would be fundamentally different? And we don't feel there's a great difference between the two. I think personally, I think the issues have been considered thoroughly. I mean, considering something and coming to a different conclusion and not considering something are two entirely different things. And I believe the report goes into some detail, more detail than would normally be the case, I would say, for household application in terms of the impact on the neighbours. One of the sections of the report says it refers to impact from the occupiers amenity space and ground floor windows nearest to the side boundary. So I do believe that the report does adequately cover and discuss those points. The balcony screen is set away from the boundary, so we don't feel that the screen itself is going to be harmful. From any balcony or terrace, there can typically be some level of views kind of towards, angled views towards neighbours' gardens. We're of the view that the nature of the screen and its location would adequately protect privacy. In terms of overbearing, it is subjective. There's nothing in policy that says a development can or can't be more than a certain height. The only kind of absolutes are in terms of what you can do without permission. Once it needs permission, it really is a subjective judgment. And when we have regard to the height of it, the depth of it, relationship to windows, the size of the neighbour's garden, what extent, what proportion of the neighbour's boundary that it sits adjacent to, all these things are what mean that we have to take each case on its merits, because generally speaking, each site will be slightly different. Probably all the points. Yeah, I think I just wanted to flag that whilst it's always unfortunate when officers come to a decision which is different to a neighbour or an applicant. That doesn't infer it hasn't been considered. I believe this has been considered in great depth. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Right, discussion. Anybody have any comments to make on this application? Maybe people who went on the visit this morning that saw it. No? Ian Johnson. Sorry, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I was one of the councillors who went on the site visit this morning at 96 Lavernock Road, and I think I appreciate, you know, Ian Robinson's comments that these things, you know, can be subjective. I looked at the, to be honest, I think the size of the houses, I think for one thing, more generally took me by surprise because I'm more used to dealing with terraces in the centre of Barry, but you know, it did appear to be you know, a large extension and to be, you know, sort of quite overbearing. I think if you were, you know, sort of on that boundary line and on the property next to it. But I would say, I mean, I think it was, you know, it was useful to as with, you know, both site visits today, I think were very useful in gaining an understanding of the context in which, you know, the application is being made. I think, I mean, I think obviously the major comments around this are around the, you know, the impact on the neighbours, but, you know, so I was also interested by the colour schemes and the burnt larch, you know, that was being recommended for this, and I'm not sure that, you know, that I'm not sure I'm particularly happy with, you know, with the, you know, the extension as proposed. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And that, of course, is a matter of taste rather than planning. We have no other hands up, and I see nobody proposing or say. I'll for the sake of progress, I will move officers' recommendations. If somebody would like to second.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Birks. Can we move straight to it? I'm guessing from what Ian's just said, he's not happy with it. If you're not happy, could you indicate, and we can see whether we need a list vote. Right, Councillor Cave.
Yeah, I'm not happy with it, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, in that case, we'll go straight to a vote. We'll go straight to a vote. Fors and against. For our officer recommendations or against officers' recommendations. Amy, can you?
Yes, absolutely, Chair. Okay, so can I start with Councillor Bruce, please?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Buckley?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Cave?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Champion has indicated that he's needed to leave the meeting. So moving to Councillor Cowp.
Against.
Councillor Drake is absent, so moving to, and Councillor Ernest has declared and left. So moving to Councillor Gilligan.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Hodges.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
An Erbyn against.
Thank you. Councillor Payne.
Obliged for.
Thank you. Councillor Perks.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Stallard.
Obliged for.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Abstain.
Thank you. And Councillor Wilson. Councillor Wilson.
Mark, you still with us?
He is still connected. Councillor Wilson, can I take your vote, please? Could you please indicate your vote via the chat, Councillor Wilson? If you're unable to respond via your video conference. There's no response, Chair.
No, I'm assuming he's not back for some reason. Not back to his desk for some reason. But I think, given the numbers, it's not.
Yes, Chair.
Crucial.
We have 4 votes for currently. and 8 against and 1 abstention. So irrelevant of Councillor Wilson's vote, it would still result in against.
Yeah, thank you very much. Right, can you call Councillor Ernest back in, please?
Absolutely, Chair. Bear with me one moment, please.
Sorry, Chair.
Mm.
We need to give reasons for or against, don't we?
No,
yeah, that's not.
Yeah,
Yeah,
hang on a sec. Don't call Anthony back.
That's
yet.
okay. That's okay. I haven't.
Yeah, reasons against. I apologise. You're quite right.
Yeah, all we've done there is vote again.
Yeah, I
vote
think
down
the
the
reason
motion, so
you're
we need a
quite
new
right. No,
motion.
I think the reasons are from what people are saying was the overbearing nature.
Can I make a suggestion, please? Sorry,
Certainly, Ian.
Thank you. Because this is a householder application, if this is refused and if this were to go to appeal, the officer's report is the sole submission that the council makes in defending the appeal. So it may be a good idea for this to go back to officers to prepare an amended report where we can substantiate the reason for refusal in a report. Otherwise, the only document will be an officer's recommendation for a report recommending approval, and then a reason for refusal at the end. So if members are so minded, we can revert back next time with a report that sets that out.
Is everyone happy with that? Please indicate. Anthony, you're not listening. You must
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, yeah, everyone seems happy with that. Everyone, I can see all the indications are hands up or hands on the lists, so we'll go with that. Thank you. Right, moving on, we have any items which the chair has decided are urgent, and this is the Parc Dyffryn Solar Farm report, which will be for noting. I think, Ian, again, you're presenting on this, aren't you?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thanks to members for looking at this tonight. Apologies for the relatively short period of time that members have been given to look at what is an extremely long report. It's unfortunately a consequence of the limited time frame that officers have had to prepare this report. So this matter relates to a development of national significance, a solar farm. The council's role in this process is to provide what's known as a local impact report, and we are given a relatively short time frame to prepare this report, which is highly technical in nature, relies on input from consultees. The reason that it's been reported now for noting is that if the council does not submit its local impact report within a specified timescale, we don't receive a fee. I think initially we miss half the fee, and then if we miss a further deadline shortly afterwards, we'd miss the remainder of the fee. So this matter was dealt with under emergency powers recently, where we have authorization to send the local impact report to PEDU to ensure that we don't miss the fee, which we can't afford to miss. So what we did in the same circumstances last year with a solar farm DNS at Brimwell Farm was that the local impact report was sent to PEDU, and then any additional comments that members had as a consequence of it being brought to the committee for noting and sort of digesting can then be sent to PEDU separately, but they wouldn't form part of the local impact report. The local impact report is a largely factual document. It sets out the key issues and it suggests whether there may be a negative or positive or neutral effect in respect to those issues, and it quantifies that as kind of slight or moderate or major positive or negative effects. Critically, what the report doesn't do is provide a kind of a balancing exercise in terms of whether the positive outweighs the negative or vice versa. It doesn't make a recommendation for approval or refusal of the scheme. It merely sets out to PEDU and to the inspector that will be appointed to look at it what we see as being the relevant issues and what we note might be the level of kind of change or effect in respect of those issues. So that's why it's not a planning application report in the normal way, but nevertheless we wanted to bring it to committee for members to see, because it is obviously a large scale development, and by all means if members do have any kind of points they want to discuss or make, that's fine. Any subsequent comments that members may want to make to PEDU can be done individually, or if they are agreed comments of the committee, then in the case of the Brinwell Farm one I mentioned before, a letter was sent to PEDU from the Chair of Planning Committee, but those would need to be, I would say, agreed points if they are to be kind of represented as committee points. Representations that members may wish to make to PEDU in this respect don't need to be of the same kind of format as this local impact report. So if members individually or as a committee want to make certain points in respect of the acceptability and object or support it or carry out that balancing exercise, that's fine. It doesn't need to be the kind of the local impact report kind of structure of comment. So that just sets out the basics of kind of why it's here and what the purpose of tonight would be. I'll just run through some of the main points about the development in the context of some plans and the report. Share my screen. So this is the site. So it's 96.5 hectares of land to the sort of south and west of the Downs, and you can see St Nicholas on that plan just to the west of the site. Approximately 85 hectares would be developed with solar panels. It's almost exclusively agricultural land. The agricultural land survey that's been carried out with this has concluded that about 15% of the land is of a grade that will be classed as best and most versatile. So best and most versatile agricultural land is grades 1, 2 and 3A. The bulk of the site is found to be 3B, but there's approximately 14.5 hectares of 3A land. So that's the land that is most highly protected in planning policy. It would generate 65 megawatts of energy. Aside from agricultural land quality, visual impact is obviously a really significant one, both in terms of the impact of the development itself and potentially any cumulative impacts with others. So you might notice in the local impact report, we've made reference to some of the other smaller scale solar farms that have been approved in the last number of years. At the time, we probably didn't think they were small scale because they felt quite significant, but actually, these developments of national significance that we're seeing now, they dwarf the former solar farms that we saw in size. So it will be relevant for the inspector to consider the impact of this individually, but also cumulatively with others. So we have these other approved farms that I've referred to, but we are also aware of 2 other developments of national significance in broadly this area that we are going to be seeing relatively shortly, I think, and be carrying out these local impact reports for. So the cumulative impact is relevant. There'd be a new access off the highways to the north. Now, generally speaking, with these developments, the bulk of highways impacts tend to happen during the construction phase. So it's estimated there'd probably be about 20 HGV movements per day. If it was approved and constructed, the operational phase of the development doesn't generally attract a lot of vehicle movements with it. The report also goes into some detail on other matters like historic environment and ecology, and potentially some adverse effects on ecology that would be more kind of more keenly felt early on in the development, but potentially mitigated by a number of ecological enhancement proposals that the applicant is making. You'll note from the report that there's reference made to kind of the proportion of the 40-year the lifetime of the proposal is 40 years. The report notes that actually it would take 10 to 12 years before in summary the benefits are felt. So there's obviously a level of kind of emissions and a carbon footprint associated with the construction of the development and the manufacturing of the panels. So that that kind of smoke isn't immediately consumed, but there would be obviously a significant sort of 30-year period when within the 40 years when that's passed. It's probably too detailed and too complex to go into any other points in very fine detail. But if members want clarity on any point, I can try and give that. Or as I said before, if members want to have a discussion about any kind of key themes or points that they want to follow up on with PEDU, then obviously we can do that afterwards. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate the report came in so late, but the reasons are clear, and I mean, hopefully most members have had a chance to at least skim through it and pick out salient points. Personally, I thought your responses to Pedu that were in heavy ink were well made, generally speaking, and I'll now call in some of the members to make their comments. Helen Payne, first of all, please.
Hiya, thank you, Ian. It was just obviously I have been in work today as well, so I have kind of skimmed it, but there was some things on page 30 around the impact assessments and the photo imaging. Do we get to see eventually the photo imaging? That was my one thing, because that was one of the omissions in there, and there were some stuff in relation to the flight path of where it's situated in terms of the glare and things like that. Do we get to know about all those things as well? Page 30.
Yeah, I would say if there is more information to come, so if hypothetically the inspector that is appointed to look at this considers that the information is deficient or further information is needed to enable a full assessment to be made, I would imagine that then we would have, that would be publicised and we'd have an opportunity to look at that. Yeah, it's something we flagged, that we felt that particularly with the visual impact, the level of information with the application didn't enable us to kind of make as full an assessment as we might have done. But yes, there should be an opportunity to see that if that information arises, but that will largely come down to whether the inspector deems that that's necessary information to enable him to make a recommendation to the minister on it.
Okay, thank you.
Perhaps that could form part of the narrative of any letter that we do send as a committee, if that's okay with everybody. Next up is Councillor Cave. Christine.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've also got something about page 30, and now I'm wondering if my page 30 is not the right page, because obviously when they show up electronically, they're not always correct, because obviously Helen's referred to page 30. But in my version on page 30, you list some of the existing solar farms. And I think from my perspective, there's one missing from the A48, which is the one at Corntown. It's not very large, but it is another one on the A48. And I just wondered if we could add that into the report.
Yeah, the report does say including. It's not exhaustive to list all of them. I think the one at Corntown is more physically and visibly remote from this, and there's less likely to be a cumulative impact with it. What we can't do is amend the impact report now, because I think that would have a risk attached to it that Pedu might deem that if we're sending an amended report, we haven't essentially sent our final report until beyond the deadline. But again, it can, if members want to flag other ones, that can form part of the submissions that we referred to you making earlier.
Lovely. Okay, thank you for that.
Anthony. Councillor
Yes,
Ernest.
Chairman. Chairman, my concern is whether we should legally be going ahead with commenting on this. I'd like advice from our legal officer. It's an item which under item 10 you brought forward as urgent. Personally, I've barely had the chance to look at 2 pages of it. We were not expecting at the 24th hour, the 11th hour, if you prefer it, to have an 80-page report for members to carefully read, absorb, and give detailed comments on at committee tonight. Bearing in mind the particular time of year as well, it seems to me that it's not only unfortunate, but maybe the timing is inappropriate. And could I ask James Doherty whether we are within our rights for this matter to be deferred and looked at on another date? I appreciate the urgency of it, but equally, there are a lot of communities can be affected. We're looking at over 80 hectares, which is an awful lot of acres in old money, and substantial impact upon the area around, particularly Wenvo and St Nicholas. Could I ask that question, please?
Yeah, I think my understanding is that Managing Director's emergency powers have been obtained for the officers to submit comments in line with the timescales required. So from that perspective, that's where the powers are. So the report was for noting for planning committee because the powers are being delegated under the emergency powers process.
Yeah, could I add to that? Sorry, that the if we'd have brought it to a subsequent planning committee next time, then it's later on in the process, and I think if members did have comments to make, it would be potentially less likely that PEDU might be able to kind of take them into account in the same way. Members aren't required to make submissions or agree anything here. It is for noting, as James says. So members aren't being told, here's 80 pages, you have to give us a view on this. That's not the case. It is an unfortunate timing, but I think the reason it was brought today was that if we'd have brought it in late January, then that's some way then over the consultation deadline for the PEDU have given to all parties.
Yep, Chairman, can I come back? And I recognise that point, of course, and understand it. The fact of the matter is this is a highly important and sensitive application. And bearing in mind the procedures, what we normally might have done in the past is have a special meeting of the Planning Committee to consider this at an early date in January. But sorry about the telephone. But maybe the local members will wish to enlarge on that. I'm personally unhappy about having such a large report to look at and make constructive comments in view of the very, very short timescale. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Williams next, please.
Yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate that we're noting it. So do we have an option then as planning members to feed you separately any comments rather than through? And so that answers that question then. We can do that next. Is there a set deadline for that?
You can also, I don't know about the set deadline for that, but there's also the opportunity for individual councillors, not just councillors on this committee, but all councillors, to contribute to the consultation with PEDU as individuals. This is really asking whether we want to send anything forward as a committee. And yes, you can submit stuff to me to put forward, or through Ian to put forward as a letter, a narrative. Backing up, I guess, the report that Ian has already sent in, but I mean that's not going to have time to come back to committee, so you'd have to rely on my discretion about whether I thought that was representing the views of this committee. It's kind of a bit of a poison chalice there. Councillor Perry next.
Oops. Hi again, yeah. Obviously, this is in my ward again. Take up a lot of time. I do believe I've been told the deadline is 23:59 hours tonight, and no submissions are accepted from people like myself after this deadline. Can you just confirm the exact deadline for us, please?
The deadline for us for submitting the local impact report was today. The difficulty with an assumption that we could delay the local impact report until after planning committee is that it would kind of presume that what might come out of it being considered committee could be accommodated. So there's risk attached to that, because if we hadn't sent the local impact report in and it was brought to committee tonight and X, Y, and Z changes needed to be made, and that couldn't be accommodated before midnight, we then lost thousands of pounds of the fee. So that's why we couldn't take the risk of leaving it till the very last minute. Today is the deadline for the local impact report. I'm not 100% sure on the status of other representations received after the date. My instinct is I would be surprised if PEDU said they weren't going to consider other representations made, in the same way that we consider representations made to planning applications after the 21 days. But I think if any representations are going to go in after the consultation theoretical deadline is closed, obviously the sooner they go in after that deadline, the better. Local impact report different though. We could have submitted it afterwards, but it was the risks that I've already described, and that is a very we sought comfort from PEDU on whether we could have a bit of leeway on that, and they were absolutely clear that we wouldn't get the fee if we breached it.
Thank you. Yeah, because that's what I was told. Maybe there's some confusion, but I was definitely told that tonight is the deadline and nothing will be considered after
tonight. So community council has been, desperately getting them in pretty quick. Can I just request, though, perhaps following on from what Anthony said, that we've got 4 more of these coming through the pipeline that I'm aware of, and perhaps we can be a bit more proactive and start the reports now, and hold a special committee meeting at the beginning of the consultation period rather than on the final day for the future ones.
In my view, it would be very difficult to start reports on things that we haven't had submitted to us. I can assure you this wasn't left to the last minute. The case officer has been working on this, bear in mind the remainder of a case officer's workload, but the case officer has been working extremely hard, putting a heck of a lot of time on this, and it's an unfortunate consequence of the limited timescales we have. But I certainly don't want any members being under the impression that this has been left to the last minute by choice.
Can I suggest that part of the narrative letter that we're going to be sending, possibly sending from this committee, include a comment to the effect that the short timescale that PEDU allow for LIRs and for councils to respond does not take account of the normal cycle of planning committee and planning committees, and that perhaps they should reconsider those timescales in light of that. Is everyone okay with that being part of the narrative? And does that answer some of the problems we've just been discussing? So I don't know whether they'll respond to it or whether they'll react to it or whatever, but certainly whether that is part of any narrative that we do send subsequent to this meeting. Yes?
Yes, I agree with you, Chair.
I see nobody disagreeing.
Yes, I agree, Chair.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. Right, moving on. Eddie, is that a hand supporting or?
Yeah, it is, Chair. Thank you for that. And with the information we've just been given now, I think the predicament we're in, the reports for noting, and therefore on the basis that, for us to disagree, then it's going to cost us money. But we've got opportunities later on in the process to resolve some of the issues. I'm happy to move to note.
Thank you very much. Yep, I'll second that. Helen's got her hand up as well. I hope that's a second. Yep. In that case, I'm assuming nobody is going to oppose noting a report. And if you do want to put in comment, to do it through Ian Robinson, please, and he and I can then come up with a form of words that we can send to PEDU as representing the view of the committee, as opposed to representing the view of the planning department. Okay. Thank you very much. In that case, I think we're done, and I'd like to wish you all a Merry Christmas, Happy holiday, whatever you believe or do, and hopefully a Happy New Year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thanks
Thank
for your
you, Chairman.
indulgence. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
And to our officers as well.